Katherine Heigl became a household name, playing Dr. Izzy Stevens on Grey's Anatomy, but long before the awards and the movie premieres, she says she already knew what kind of family she wanted to build. Over the years, in interview after interview, Heigl has opened up about adoption, the fears she carried into motherhood, the guilt of balancing a demanding career with raising children, and the philosophy she's tried to pass down to her kids. This is her story, told largely in her own words, a story about choosing adoption before she even had a ring on her finger, about the messy and honest parts of becoming a mother, and about what she's learned along the way. Heigl has said many times that her decision to adopt wasn't a spur-of-the-moment choice, or something she landed on after struggling to conceive. It was baked into her idea of family from the very beginning, largely because of how she herself grew up. Heigl's own parents adopted her older sister, Meg, from South Korea several years before Katherine was born. Growing up alongside an adopted sibling shaped the way she thought about what a family could look like. She's explained that she wanted her own household to resemble the one she came from. That meant international adoption, and specifically adoption from South Korea, was never a backup plan for her, it was the plan. She has said that she and her husband, musician Josh Kelly, started talking seriously about adoption even before they were officially engaged, which tells you how early this idea took root for both of them. That's a detail worth sitting with. Plenty of celebrities talk about adoption as something they arrived at later, sometimes after fertility struggles or other complications. Heigl's account is different. She frames it as something she wanted from a start, independent of whether she could have biological children. She said outright that she and Kelly discussed having biological kids too, but chose to adopt first because more than anything she just wanted to be a mother, and she was open to however that happened. Heigl's path to motherhood is tied closely to her relationship with Josh Kelly, an American singer-songwriter. The two met in 2005 while filming the music video for Kelly's single, Only You. At the time, Heigl was an actress on the rise, closing in on an Emmy nomination for her work on Grey's Anatomy. Kelly has described their meeting as almost accidental in its timing. He just closed on a house in Nashville and had to fly back to Los Angeles the very next day to shoot the video. He said that the two of them simply hit it off on set and never really stopped being together after that. They got engaged the following year in 2006 and married in December 2007 in Park City, Utah, the same state where Heigl would eventually settle her family years later. In interviews around that time, Heigl described feeling unexpectedly ready for the next chapter of her life. She talked about being surprised at her own readiness to settle down, start a family, and build what she jokingly called her Kelly Empire. That kind of eagerness, paired with the adoption conversations she and Kelly were already having, set the stage for what came next. Heigl has recounted the moment they found out about their first daughter with real emotion. She was working on a film with Ashton Kutcher in Atlanta at the time, and Kelly was there with her. She's described it as a chaotic, exciting, almost surreal moment, the kind where you know there's a child out there waiting for you, and you can barely stand the wait to meet her. The two of them ended up in her trailer, each on their own phone call, as adoption officials described the little girl they were being matched with, a baby girl born the day before Heigl's own birthday, who had a congenital heart condition that had already been surgically corrected. The adoption agency encouraged them to take time, to consult their own doctors, to think it through carefully before committing. Heigl has said their answer was immediate. They wanted her. In a stroke of fortunate timing, Kelly's father is a heart surgeon, and the agency was able to send him the baby's cardiogram directly, giving the couple medical reassurance from someone they trusted completely. Heigl has been clear that this didn't change their decision. They'd already decided they were doing this regardless, but it did give them clarity about what they were walking into. She said that once the heart condition was corrected, her daughter had, in her words, a perfectly healthy heart. One of the more candid things Heigl has shared publicly is how she and Kelly worked through the emotional uncertainty that can come before an adoption, particularly the unspoken question of whether love for an adopted child arrives the same way love for a biological child does. Heigl has said she personally never doubted the answer, largely because of her own upbringing. Her mother had both biological and adopted children, and Heigl has said it made no discernible difference in how her mother loved any of them. She's been generous but honest about the fact that Kelly needed to arrive at that same certainty in his own way, and that he did, becoming, in her words, gracious and accepting of it. It's a small but telling detail because it pushes back against the idea that adoptive parents feel instant, uncomplicated certainty from day one. Heigl's account suggests that even a parent fully committed to adoption can carry unspoken questions that only get resolved through experience and reflection. Perhaps the most emotionally raw material Heigl has shared publicly is about the early years of motherhood when her new daughter didn't respond to her affection the way she'd hoped. Heigl has described feeling heartbroken by this, even questioning whether she was cut out to be a mother at all. She's talked about watching her daughter bond almost effortlessly with Kelly, who would get down on the floor, roll around, and make their daughter laugh in a way that came naturally to him. She's joked that her husband earned the nickname Disneyland Dad for exactly this reason. Heigl has been open that this wasn't her style of parenting. She wasn't the one rolling around on the floor, and for a while, that made her feel like she was losing some kind of competition for her daughter's affection that she didn't even realize she'd entered. Eventually, she came to understand that she simply expressed love differently. She's described herself as the cuddler type, someone her daughter would come to when she was hurt, rather than the one initiating rowdy play. She's talked about small nightly rituals, things like a bedtime routine with a couple favorite blankets, as the place where their bond actually lived, even if it didn't look like the loud, physical connection her daughter shared with her father. Heigl has also pointed to practical pressures that made those early months harder. She returned to work on Grey's Anatomy only a few days after bringing her daughter home, which cut into the time she had to build that early attachment. She's spoken candidly about spending more hours with her on-screen co-stars on set some weeks than with her own infant daughter, and about the guilt that came with that. A social worker reassured the couple early on that it's common for babies to bond with different caregivers at different speeds and for different reasons, which Heigl has said helped her stop reading too much into it, even though the worry never fully disappeared. She's described a real turning point a few years later during a television appearance when her daughter ran up and hugged her tightly on set. Heigl has called it a genuinely powerful moment, one that made her feel, for the first time, entirely secure in the strength of their bond. Around that same period, Kelly wrote a song for their daughter as another way of expressing what the family had built together. When Heigl talks about her daughter now, the language shifts from anxiety to something closer to reverence. She's described her as the child who made her a mother, who gave her life purpose and direction, and has spoken about a kind of boundless, enduring love that she attributes directly to that relationship. Heigl and Kelly didn't stop at one adoption. In 2012, they adopted a second daughter, born in Louisiana. Heigl has talked publicly about how that adoption came together somewhat unexpectedly. She and Kelly had originally hoped to adopt internationally again, but the landscape had shifted. Korea had become considerably harder to adopt from by that point, and other countries she looked into, like China, had extensive waiting lists. The domestic adoption that followed, she said, came together in a way that felt almost serendipitous. 5 years later, at 39, Heigl became pregnant naturally and welcomed a son in 2017. She's spoken about how different that pregnancy and birth experience was compared to her adoptions. Her son was in a breech position for over a month before his due date, requiring a scheduled C-section, and he needed help breathing immediately after birth. Heigl has drawn a clear distinction between her 3 experiences of becoming a parent, adopting a newborn, adopting a 9-month-old, and giving birth herself, each one teaching her something different about the transition into parenthood. Even with all that experience behind her, Heigl has said the third time didn't feel any easier. She's talked about feeling overwhelmed and unprepared for parts of new motherhood all over again, coming home from work feeling like she was missing important moments, and dealing with real physical and emotional strain, anxiety, and stress-related back problems among them. She's been blunt in interviews that no amount of being told parenting is hard actually prepares you for living it. For a while, Heigl and Kelly considered whether their family needed a 4th child, weighing whether that would come through biology, adoption, or fostering. She said that the arrival of the COVID-19 pandemic shifted her entire perspective on that question, and that she ultimately became content with the family of 3 children they already had. At some point, Heigl and Kelly made the decision to leave Los Angeles behind and settle their family on a ranch in Utah. Heigl has spoken about wanting a quieter, more grounded environment for her kids to grow up in, away from the pace and exposure of Hollywood. She's described the appeal of rural life in fairly simple terms: space, animals, time by the river, a slower rhythm to the day, and has talked about prioritizing family time as a deliberate choice rather than something that happened by accident. This move reflects a broader theme in how Heigl talks about parenting, an emphasis on normalcy. Despite being raised by 2 people with public profiles, Heigl has consistently said she wanted her children to have as ordinary a childhood as possible, shielded from unnecessary exposure to fame and public attention. As her children have grown, Heigl has spoken more broadly about the values she hopes to instill in them. She's talked about actively working against the societal pressure many girls face to be endlessly agreeable or pleasing to others, and has said she wants her daughters in particular to understand that their worth isn't tied to meeting other people's expectations of them. Education has also been something she's emphasized publicly, describing efforts to give her children access to strong learning opportunities and to encourage them toward whatever their individual interests turn out to be, rather than steering them in one direction. Alongside that, she's spoken about trying to model kindness and community involvement, saying that charitable work and service have been a regular part of family life, meant to instill a sense of responsibility beyond their own household. She's also been thoughtful about the realities of raising children in a multiracial family. Heigl has acknowledged what she's called her own relatively insulated upbringing and has spoken about feeling a responsibility to prepare her children for experiences of racism and different societal perceptions that she herself never had to navigate personally. She's described wanting her home to be a place where her kids can talk openly about their identities and their individual birth stories, rather than treating those topics as off-limits or uncomfortable. Heigl has walked a careful line between sharing her family story, largely because she believes adoption stories deserve visibility, and protecting her children's day-to-day privacy. She's spoken about limiting her children's access to social media and phones for as long as possible, citing concerns about the pressures that come with early exposure to platforms built around comparison and public attention. At the same time, she shared that her children occasionally find ways around those limits, joking about catching them borrowing her devices. She continues to speak about her family in interviews and on social media in general terms, expressing gratitude, marking milestones, reflecting on how far they've come as a family, while keeping the more granular details of her children's daily lives largely out of public view. That balance seems intentional. Heigl clearly wants the broader adoption story told, both because it matters to her personally and because she hopes it can be useful to other families considering adoption, but she's drawn a consistent line around how much of her children's individual lives she puts on display. Adoption has also shaped Heigl's philanthropic work beyond her own family. In 2008, she and her mother Nancy founded a foundation focused on animal welfare and combating cruelty, established in memory of a family member. While that work is centered on animals rather than adoption directly, Heigl has connected it to the same underlying value she credits her parents with instilling in her, the idea that family, in whatever form it takes, comes with a responsibility to care for those who can't advocate for themselves. What comes through most clearly in Heigl's own account of her adoption journey isn't a polished, uncomplicated fairy tale. It's a much more honest story, one that includes real doubt, real guilt about balancing career and motherhood, and a slow, sometimes painful process of learning how to bond with a child in her own way rather than someone else's. She's been unusually candid for a public figure about the fact that love and attachment aren't always instant, and that showing up consistently over years matters more than any single dramatic moment. Nearly 2 decades into building her family, Heigl's public reflections keep returning to a few consistent themes. That adoption was a deliberate choice rooted in her own upbringing, that motherhood challenged her in ways she didn't expect, and that the family she built, through adoption and through birth, has given her a sense of purpose she describes as central to who she is today.